Hey guys, Morphologist here.
What's up, guys? It's Wasted Space.
And tonight we're talking about 1.098 on Patchology. Another bug-fixing patch, but we still have something to talk about.
Yeah, last week we asked you guys about what your opinions were, in particular about why you're no longer playing Space Engineers, if you're no longer playing Space Engineers, or, interestingly, why you aren't playing Space Engineers so much was also something you told us a bit about. So we thought we'd come back with some sort of look at what it was you guys had wrong with the game and what we hope is going to happen in the future regarding all that.
And a lot of the responses seem to be pretty similar to one another. I think the top three that we both observed on our respective channels were a multiplayer issue where you're just unable to play with your friends, a lack of endgame or goal in survival, and lastly, but probably one of the most important things, is that the game really doesn't run very well for a lot of people on their PCs.
Yeah, so kicking off with the first one, which is the multiplayer, is obviously something that there's only so much we could talk about as far as what there is to fix with it, but it's certainly something that I can understand is a massive issue for people. It's the sort of thing where I, for one, came to this game thinking, yeah, it's going to be cool to get all my friends together, have big spaceship battles, maybe some faction wars, something really epic, grand scale. And of course, we've all experienced the fact that that's not really something you can do at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, you could get like 2 or 3 friends in there with their ships, and by that time the sim speed is too low to really have any fun, unless you're talking about really tiny ships. But let's be honest here, a lot of us want to fight with big, giant capital ships that we spend tons of time making. Now,
I guess there's some good news in that last week's update certainly showed some decent performance improvements. This week's is also including some important performance updates. So, as you guys can see in the background here, there is now starting to be a bit of potential for this stuff to be doable, but it's still not quite there.
Yeah, they've got the sim speed stuff down really well. It's been running better. However, frames-wise, in other words, like performance for your computer, is still a little bit lacking for very large ships. Yes, the sim speed works well, but you're still only going to get like 15-20 frames if you're doing like a really big capital battle, which is still, like we said, something that we want to be able to do.
At least we do know that Keen are pretty heavy working on stuff like this MP, the netcode fix, the fabled netcode fix that we're all waiting for and hopefully sorts this stuff out. And I do think, some of the things that's going on at the moment really hint towards the idea that that is now their priority. Is get this stuff sorted almost before anything else. I noticed that planets haven't been talked about quite so much of late, for example.
Yeah, and that definitely probably has to do with them just fixing these bugs that have been plaguing the game so far, which is something that needs to be done. Performance is a huge issue right now for Space Engineers, and I think it's great they're still working on it, like we talked about before. But there is one last thing that we can talk about that we really can start offering ideas for, and that's that there is no endgame or goal for survival currently. And I've had some ideas about that, but first I want to hear what you think, actually, Wasted. Have you had any thoughts about what might improve the endgame for survival, or what goals that might be set?
Well, certainly there is an issue with survival and sort of the progression of things, if you want to call it that. Endgame's one way of putting it, but people want some sort of goal, some sort of target to aim for in survival, or some sort of threat to mean that survival is the target. And as it currently stands, we'll all agree there is a very limited amount of that in place. You survive by getting enough oxygen, getting yourself up and running, and then from there on you're pretty much left to your own devices. So you're talking like AI or something, right? Yeah, that's where I think my main thinking would be, is there needs to be some sort of ability to add in a threat. There needs to be more elements, either in sort of a pure AI form, or with more support to be able to do that as players, perhaps. But of course that hinges a bit more on the multiplayer side of things, so...
Well, I suppose now's a really good time to talk about some of the things that we've been seeing in the source code as of late. There were some images released recently of space bugs. They're not textured, and I don't think they have any animations yet, but it does give us a little bit of a hint into what Keen might be working on behind closed doors. We certainly haven't heard any official release on what they're going to be doing, if they're going to actually have space bugs. It could just be a concept, but if it does become something real, it could be really exciting for Space Engineers. Even if it were to appear on planets, like running into space bugs and having to erect walls and defenses, that sounds pretty darn cool.
Yeah, I've seen the stuff about the space bugs, and yeah, they do look pretty cool, but I think the space bugs before, because I know there's been a lot of people like, oh my god, spiders in space, what the hell? You know, I think what this is one of Keen's normal routes where they will produce an example for the community as to how to go about using a new feature. So they've done this before with modding, they've done this with sound blocks, they've done this with scenarios, tutorials, all this stuff. They'll introduce kind of, here's a template that you can work with so that you can now go and use this same setup to create other options. So while the spiders is, I think it's spiders basically, is what we've seen, there's, I think, a lot more potential, because what I really think this is going to be is, hey modders, here's the framework you need now to utilize AI, and it would be insane for AI not to be somewhere in the back of sort of Keen's mind as such, given that good AI is a thing, and so much of what Marek is doing now is AI focused. Just seems to me that that's got to be a natural progression at some point soon.
Yeah, so what you're thinking, or what you're saying here, is they're really setting the stage for modders to start introducing AI into the game, which is really compelling, actually. That would mean that the amount of AI that appears in the game could be much more diverse than, say, what Keen could produce on their own, because the community as a whole would definitely have a lot more manpower than Keen currently has. And I would think that, judging by the way modders have worked in the past so far, a lot of them are really passionate about making mods. We could end up seeing something absolutely fantastic like we've seen before from such great modders like where's that, like Matt or Darth Biomech, to just name two. There's so many more though. Ikester is another one. They're like, oh, and the guy who makes Azimuth.
Yeah, and I think it's a testament to the game in general that there are still so many cool things coming out on the workshop. You know, every single day that front page will have something new and really cool and exciting on it, even though everyone kind of knows that at the moment there's not actually that many people playing Space Engineers in comparison to what there used to be. So imagine what could happen when these same guys get their hands on, a framework for how to put AI onto anything they want within the game, and the things that could come from that, the scenarios that could come from that people could create. And there is, I think, inevitably an end game involved in that, because much like this scenario setup, imagine that, but instead of it being a scenario where you're repairing things and so on, it's a scenario where you have to, let's just pick a game, it's a recreation of one of the missions from TIE Fighter, for example, or X-Wing Alliance, which with that sort of framework and Space Engineers would be totally possible.
Like, imagine, for example, by the way, the person I was talking about made Azimuth, that's Tumble TV. Sorry, buddy. He's a friend. I don't know why his name flipped my mind. But one of the things that you are saying here is creating these scenarios, and I imagine in my mind something like the video I produced with Shaq like 2 weeks back, where we made the Death Star run. It'd be so cool if that could be like a map scenario that you could do, and the TIE fighters and all the Imperials would be like AI that chase you down the trench. That would be amazing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. I mean, yeah, I can't wait for something like that, and that would be almost a perfect two birds with one stone route for Keen, I think, because you get that end game for single player, and you get a tool that could be amazing in multiplayer as well. Take that same scenario, but then do it with a team of 5. That could be amazing.
Now, another thing I wanted to mention, another idea that I actually had, was a way to make the game a little bit more coherent, not just for experienced players, but for newer players as well. I feel like there needs to be some sort of better navigation system so that newer players and older players can tell where they stand inside the universe. Otherwise, it just feels large and expansive and endless, and everything starts to look the same. It's very hard to tell where the line between your space and your enemy's space is. If there was some sort of navigation system that was developed through a module that you could build, where you could see where your enemy is and what planets they've claimed versus yours, I think that would be fantastic. It doesn't even have to be super detailed where you can see textures. It could just be a basic 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional representation with 3-4-bit colors. It doesn't have to be super complex, but something to give you an idea of where you stand would be, I think, huge in the game. It would definitely make it feel much more like a living world if you could see what people have done. And I think that could also tie more into once they start doing things like systems, solar systems with planets, if they're ever planning on doing that. that means like whole systems could be mapped and capitalized on by a player or an alliance that you have to fight against. That would be so cool.
Definitely, and just for a new player, and I know this to be the case because I do hear this in the comments, and I think there was a couple of people even replied this on the video, is that Space Engineers, and we probably don't realise it because we started a long time ago, before there was quite so much to it, is a confusing game to step into now. And having something that says, you are here, is kind of comforting to some extent when you're a new player. Maybe even have it something that's an option. It doesn't have to be on, but you can have it on servers, much like any of the other options, so that you have that opportunity to learn with it. Or if you've got a server that wants to play super hardcore, you don't have to be using that sort of thing.
Yeah, just for newer players in general, I completely agree. It's something that's very comforting to know where you are and not have to think like, oh God, where am I going? I'm trapped out in this expanse where I'll never find anybody. I mean, if we do get to that point where the game is wonderfully optimized and you can have 50, 60-man servers or maybe even network server like something that Eve has, then a mapping system will become ever more important for the scale of the game that would exist.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's the sort of thing that people almost kind of dream of with Space Engineers, because you feel like somewhere deep inside it there is that sort of potential that if you were to sort out all of these issues, like I have this funny dream in the back of my mind that if everything finally clicks into place, I want to try and remake Freelancer in Space Engineers, because I think it's doable. And then you have a Freelancer with player-made vessels and player-made stations. There's some quite crazy things out there that could become a possible endgame, but I think a lot of this unfortunately comes back to that same thing that we started off with, which is the multiplayer needs to be intrinsic to it. That is what people want to play in this game for the most part. There are single player guys out there, and they should be catered for, and I'm sure it's a great game for them, single player, but I think the majority of people playing Space Engineers want multiplayer to be as good as it can be.
And multiplayer is instrumental into bringing more people into the fold, because if you think about what really makes games popular, for instance, Ark Survival Evolved, what's made that game so phenomenally successful is not necessarily the way the game plays, but more so the way that people see it and the way that it looks fun, because when it's being put on YouTube or it's being put on a live stream, it's much more compelling to watch because the multiplayer just works and you know where you are in the world. And that's something that, unfortunately, Space Engineers lacks right now. If you were to live stream this, you're really limited to like a build-off and maybe having a few people in there, but it's not really a true survival multiplayer game like you might find in other places in the market. But I want to say, though, here that I'm not saying that other games are better. I think Space Engineers is great, and it's got such a great idea. It's got such great potential. I don't think any game could really match it if it were to achieve its full potential. But I'm saying here that we really need that component to bring more people into the fold and make this game come more alive with more active players.
Yep, I second that completely. And I think one of the comments on my video from last week from a fellow called Kerfalicious kind of summed it up, and I will have to summarise very, very briefly because this fellow wrote a huge amount. But at the moment, it almost feels like there's a huge amount of potential. They've come up with an amazing concept, and then they're almost not sure what to do with it to get it to where it's actually become a full game and not just a sandbox concept. And it is still, I think, the case that Space Engineers is just a step away from being that full-fledged, really cool game that everyone's hoping for, and is still just a little bit of a concept.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we don't even really have customizable characters. We all have the same plastic face currently. There's so many things that, if you really think about, are still missing to make this like a fully completed game. But it is still in the early stages of the game, we can admit that, but it's been that way for quite a while, you could argue. But Keen's been working hard. They've always updated stuff, and they've been really good about communicating with us about what they're doing. And so that gives me a lot of faith, and it gives me a lot of trust that they're going to at least deliver on a lot of the things that they're saying they're working on.
And as does sort of the actions over the last 3 weeks return my confidence in the game's potential to be as good as we all want it to be. And I think that's where all of this frustration and a lot of, certainly a lot of what I'm saying this evening has come from, is just this idea that the game has got massive potential, and I really, really want it to get there because I enjoy it as it stands. But goddamn, will I enjoy that game I can see Space Engineers becoming if it just gets those few bits in place.
Oh my god, I mean, can you imagine going around the universe pillaging and destroying with the Death Lotus? Or capturing ships with my Archeron in the giant bay doors? We can't do that now, but we could!
Proper 64-player servers with organised factions, freelancer, maybe set up jump lanes. I've got all sorts of ideas. Yes, it's going to be amazing. Fingers crossed Keen can get it there. I think they're still just about going on the right line.
Or you pull up to a planet and launch a bunch of launch pods on the surface filled with players, and they rush into an enemy base and try to take it over.
Or just, and maybe I'll send a screenshot of this to you so that you can show it in the video as well. I've been working on a big PvP map with some of the guys in my community that we were designing, a bit like My Planet Surface, where it's a full-blown city, and the idea would be tanks and on foot, driving, rumbling around there, natural gravity on, so when you blew up bits of a building, the building would come down, there'd be rubble everywhere. And of course, right now, that's not really quite doable. You can't really play on that map. It got a bit too complex. But just that, I can see being so damn cool. And from the last week or so, 2 weeks, as I said, I can see that now being in sight. Whereas I was almost starting to lose a little bit of hope with how the performance was in Space Engineers.
Yeah, I mean, you bump a rotor or a piston just once in a fat like that, you could just say it's over because the sim speed will go down to nothing. Oh, but anyway, I think we've talked quite a bit about how we think it could improve, and I think there's a lot more that could be done, and I'm really interested to see what your thoughts are. Not just what's wrong with the game, like we talked about last week, but what you think could be done to make the game better. What are your thoughts? I'm interested to hear.
In particular, I think in regarding that sort of ideas for what would provide a good end game experience for this game, because I think there's a lot of options there, and there's a lot of different routes it could go. And some are combat orientated, some are planet oriented. There's all sorts of different ways, but I think that in particular could be a really interesting one. So definitely throw down some ideas. We've done the negative side. Let's hear the positive, upbeat. Now let's make it better side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. What good is critique unless you offer some sort of way to fix it? So anyway, guys, I think that's it for now. Thanks for watching Patchology, and I hope to see you guys next week.
Yep, cheers, guys. Catch you next week.
Would you?
No. You're thinking it's all business. It's a star base in deep space. And then you walk in and I find you guys doing this.
The music begins.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, yeah, I am the DJ, so I have to go up into the proper DJ position.
Well, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to another night at the Star Wars, Star Trek Dance Club. It's a sin.
Hold on. Here we go. Ready?
Twitch. Oh, spit it.
That's as fast as it goes.
Might be easier with your helmet on.
He's just twitching around for me, pun intended. No gravity!